Hello good people, this is Peter Svidler with the recap video of the first round of the Tata Steel Wijk tournament for Chess 24. This is the bright new year 2019, and the Wijk as usual is the first major chess event of the year. Very exciting field. Lots of promising youngsters and also a mix of very well established players. And for this video I've chosen the game between Liren, who has had famously a tremendous 2018, only lost one game throughout the year, and that very late in the year went from a portion of 2017 I think until the very late in 2018 unbeaten. And in round one he played the white pieces against the world champion Magnus Carlsen, so that was obviously a very good start to the tournament from the publicity point of view, and the game did not disappoint either. So this is what we'll be looking at. So let's jump into the action. Ding opens with one knight f3, to which Magnus replies knight f6, g3. Ding plays a number of openings here obviously, but knight f3, g3 is a way to keep your options flexible, and you can later switch to the Catalans if black plays d5. You can obviously, black also has a very wide variety of options available to him here. And on the first move we had some fun during the live show with Jan Gustafsson discussing just how many moves black can make in this position. But also here Magnus could have played any number of perfectly reasonable moves. d5 is fine, c5 is fine, g6 is fine of course. But he played b5, which is not an unknown move in and of itself, but a move which is a lot rarer than everything else, and which leads to the most offbeat positions I think of all the options available to black. And already here Ding could have tried for all kinds of somewhat random stuff. I believe Vladimir Kramnik once played e2, e3 in this position, which doesn't look obvious, but it has definite reasoning behind it. There is a very weird idea of playing knight a3 followed by c2, c4 here. But Ding decided to play centrally and played d4. Magnus played e6. And once again, because Ding is, among other things, a Catalan player, because perhaps he just knew this position existed via different move orders. And quite quickly he played bishop g5 here, to which I think the normal reply is bishop b7. But Magnus replies by immediate c5. And already here we were getting very excited in the studio, because it felt like both of them are very happy going for very interesting, very non-standard positions, and we were in for a treat. And in particular the next move, which may not be the best move in the position, d4, d5, was very promising in terms of leading us away from normal structures and into sort of proper wilderness. And once again we were not disappointed here. Magnus more or less immediately replied with queen a5 check. Black has other options here as well. Black can play bishop b7, which is definitely a very sensible idea. Even e takes d5, which we completely disregarded during the live show, is maybe not that stupid. The point of that move being that if you take and take on d5, black can obviously take on b2, creating a very important couple of threats, so in queen c1 and queen a1, and black is just winning here. But after e5, both bishop g2 and knight c3 are very playable, and it leads to very sharp and clear positions. Queen a5 check is objectively, I think white needs to reply in a very principled manner here in order to fight for advantage. And there is the option of playing knight bd2 in this position, allowing black to just pick up this central pawn with tempo, and then playing e4. And I don't want to go too much into detail about this position because it's difficult to establish exactly what's going on here. The knight probably has to go back to f6, white plays a4, and I think the easiest way to describe it is it's a huge mess, and white definitely has enough compensation for the pawn here. But It's not an easy decision to make, I think, on the spur of the moment, and I'm pretty sure Ding did not really know anything about this position anymore. And in that situation, I think it's very difficult to blame him for playing a much more restrained move, bishop d2. Magnus replied with queen b6, d takes e6, and already here there's a very distinct choice for black. He can take with the d-pawn, and actually during the live show I kept on making the argument that black could very easily be significantly better here if white does if white sort of ignores the dangers of this position for a while. And the computer actually confirms this and says that the only way to play here is to play a4, b4, and immediately play bishop f4, creating ideas of knight d2, knight c4, and hoping to kind of prevent black from comfortably finishing development. If instead of all this, white just makes a couple of nondescript moves like this, he will be quite significantly worse, and the machine confirms this evaluation. So d6 was very much a move black could make here, and also I felt, and I made that argument on air, that this is very much how Magnus generally approaches chess. Very solid structure, no weaknesses and no potential for weaknesses here, and actual chances for advantage if white is imprecise here. But Magnus more or less instantly took with the f-pawn instead, which leads to much sharper positions, and it made the game a lot more interesting. a4, b4 is a very logical inclusion here, and in this position Ding played a5, which may not have been the best move, but it's also very logical because you chase the queen away with tempo and you create potential a5, a6 ideas for later. I will show you at least one position later in the video where having this a6 motif is quite useful to white. And also in the game the pawn did end up being on a6, and that resource ended up mattering. But objectively it was probably better to play something like bishop g5 here, not giving black additional options yet with a5, because after a5, apart from queen c7, which is quite playable, there was an interesting option here for black of playing queen d6, sort of locking the bishop down on d2, because you don't want to be taking on d1 with the king after, let's say, bishop f4, queen d1, king d1, and let's say knight c6. Black is quite comfortably better here. So after queen d6, game could continue something along the lines of bishop g2, knight c6, castles, bishop a6, and luckily for white, he does sort of get out of the corner by playing rook e1 and then following it up with e2, e4 after bishop e7. And some position like this would quite likely arise, which I suspect is, if anyone is better here, it's black, but probably white. He has not really done enough wrong to be significantly worse yet. Magnus played queen instead, which is also a very normal and sensible move, but after bishop g2, he went for a very interesting line, which I think he himself, if I understood the quotes I've seen online correctly, I think he himself was slightly critical of his choice here, which I think is unfair, because he played in a very interesting manner, and I don't think he was running too many risks objectively. But it did feel like he was pushing the envelope quite a bit in the early game. And the move he chose here is knight c6, which seems like the most natural move in the position, but it is connected with, well, not by force, but you could feel this was coming. It is with the exchange sacrifice after knight e5, knight takes e5, bishop takes a8, and d5. This is what happened in the game. And the line I promised to show where the idea of a5, a6 is quite important is, for instance, here, if black doesn't play knight c6 and plays bishop b7, white castles, let's say bishop b7, white can play c3. And now if you play knight c6, a5, a6 just wins a very, very important tempo and drives the bishop back, and white is immediately much better after something like knight e5 once again. Which means that if black wants to develop like this, he needs to start with knight c6 here, and perhaps the bishop might even have to go to a6 in some positions. Obviously, black could just not develop anything onto the long diagonal for the time being and just be prepared to meet, let's say, knight e5 with d7, d5. There's nothing wrong with just playing bishop e7, for instance, in this position. But Magnus was, I think, feeling very, very adventurous on the day, and this decision did not take him very, very long. Knight e5. Honorable mention has to be made of the move Queen c7 with the idea of meeting knight takes c6 with bishop b7. And somewhat surprisingly, there is really nothing particularly wrong with this. During the live show, we felt that this might be quite bad, but apparently it's not, and you can actually play like this. But I don't think this was ever Magnus's intention. I think he was always very, very interested in this exact positional exchange sacrifice. So let's stop here and discuss why Black chose to give up his rook for the knight and just play this position. The reasoning, I think, is mainly these two pieces, and in particular the knight on b1, and also, of course, the bishop on a8, which will not get lost, because White can, for instance, immediately play a5, a6, which is something that Ding did. And the bishop will be quite safe on b7. But it is also not on g2, where it's normally is in these types of positions. And because it is all the way on the other side of the board, the White king, if and when it eventually appears on g1 after White castles short, will feel very short on defenders. And in particular because the pawn is already on g3, creating a number of potentially weak squares against the king. And also Black has this fantastic, oops, sorry about my usual arrow problems. Black has this fantastic structure in the center, restricting the white pieces. Once again, honorable mention goes to the knight on b1, which currently has no moves. So Black is aiming just to play sort of in the center and on the king side, not really paying too much attention to the material balance here. Also, of course, right now the bishop on a8 is kind of stuck, and if you allow bishop a6 it will get picked up. So, as mentioned, Ding played a6. You could instead play bishop f4, bishop d6, takes, and get the bishop out this way. But you are sort of developing the black pieces for him for no reason whatsoever, and you probably don't want the bishop to be on a4 either, which is probably where it will end up after it gets chased away by the queen. So a6 is a lot more natural here. And Black could try for something like queen b6, bishop b7 and takes twice. But once again, this probably seemed very pedestrian to Magnus, and he didn't really take too long to turn that idea down. And bishop d7, bishop b7 and bishop d6. And the inclusion of bishop d7 and bishop b7, first of all, it sort of clarifies matters in the corner, because the bishop would most likely go to b7 anyway, forcing Black to play bishop d7, because Black doesn't want to trade that ridiculous bishop on b7. But also very often the additional resource of developing this bishop to b5 and putting pressure on the white center is quite useful to Black in a number of lines. And bishop g5, which is what Ding played here, is maybe not the best move in the position. But one thing I want to say about what happened from here on is at times play looked somewhat random, and I think we can pinpoint at least one reasonably large mistake by Magnus in this game, which came very early in the piece, almost, well, pretty much on this move after bishop d6. But in general, despite this reasonably large material imbalance and the huge messiness of the following play, both players played, I think, extremely well, considering how difficult this position is to understand. And the evaluation never really left relative equality, apart from maybe that one bit in the middle. I did not really have enough time to delve into the depth of this position properly, so I will be giving you my first impressions, nowhere near precise, and I apologize for any potential mistakes that will creep in. Bishop g5, we were slightly surprised during the live show with Jan by this move, because we felt that bishop f4, keeping an eye on this knight, is much more natural. And after castles we went 92, hinting that we might want the e4 break, we might want the c4 break. In general, doing something to challenge this e6 d5 structure is very, very important to White's prospects here, because the moment there are targets to play in the center, black's potential kingside attack just loses greatly in strength. And yeah, this is a huge mess, and the machine suggests that black is supposed to play bishop b5 here. I also tried making queen e8 work, to which white replies by playing c4, takes queen h5, c4 once again, knight fg4, and here, once again, this is very preliminary machine findings, but queen b3, and after knight takes f2, simply rook f1 is supposed to give white some advantage, although I don't know how much you can trust an evaluation like this. The game is still quite clearly a huge mess, and I don't know if that is an actual final verdict on this. But bishop b5 seems stronger and is also somewhat more human here. Castles g4, challenging this bishop on f4, and also bringing the pieces sort of closer to the white king. h3, g5, takes, white goes c3 here, and black goes g4. And once again, not a necessarily forced line by any means, but just to give you an example of, you know, the messes that following what machine suggests in this position leads to. The variation of this particular position on my screen was around equal. I have no idea if this is true or not, and I did not really feel like I needed to investigate much further because, well, to any human eyes, this is, you just say to yourself, this is a mess, I have no idea what's going on, and since it did not really happen in the game, there is no need to dig much deeper. But instead of all that, Ding played bishop g5, going after the f6 knight, which also makes some sense because the f6 knight kind of supports the e6 d5 pair, and if you can remove that, it might become easier later to challenge the black center. But after castles, which is what we expected, White's position is actually quite risky, and somewhat notably, if you make what seems like a normal move, castles here, after queen e8, you are already, well, I hesitate to say lost, but you are in a tremendous amount of trouble because queen h5 followed by knight g4 or rook f6 h6 just kind of wins the game on the spot in many cases. So after castles, you really should start with knight d2, not committing to castles just yet. And in this position, there's a number of options. If black plays knight f7, bishop f6, queen f6, we transpose to exactly what happened in the game. And this is a somewhat balanced position, I guess. Black also can play bishop b5, which leads to huge messes. And black can also play h6. And h6 in particular is the line I wanted to show you, because after h6, white takes on f6, and goes f4 here. At least this is what the machine suggests, because if you castle and allow black to play queen g6, once again, a very, very simple, seemingly slow, but a very simple plan of just pushing the h-pawn down the board. And if white goes knight f3, you go knight g4 and keep this setup going. The bishop often will go to b5 and queen goes to h5, continuing to put pressure on the white king side. This is immediately quite decent for black, maybe even gives black chances to play for advantage. But after f4, the original evaluation is white is better. And then the machine I was consulting, you can play queen g6 here, which is kind of really bizarre. But after a while, it starts saying this is just a draw. After fe5, bishop takes e5. White has a choice of either playing knight f3 and after bishop takes b2, black just has tremendous positional compensation for all the material he's given up. Or white like queen b1, after which, for instance, move c5, c4 is a draw, preparing to take on g3 almost against any move on the next move and then give a perpetual. For instance, black makes a draw after rook f1, takes on f1, and queen f2. Black is currently a rook and a piece down. It is white to move. And black really only has one attacker because the bishop on d7 does not really join in. But this queen is just so strong, and this set of pieces so very unimpressive that white is not even remotely better here. But what I basically wanted to say by giving you these sample lines is that After castles, it's a huge mess, and black seems to be doing quite well. Instead of this, Magnus started with by playing knight f7, and here you have to argue that Ding missed the best chance I think he had this game to get an advantage. After queen f6, he could and should have played c2, c4. A move that is not easy to make, but I think not impossible either, and it makes a great deal of sense to play this in this precise configuration, challenging the black center, and also playing it while the knight is still on b1, so that you can take with the knight on c3 if black takes en passant. And black probably takes en passant here because queen b2, knight d2, b5, and now a very strong move, rook c1, preparing to meet bishop c3 with rook c2. Black might survive this, but I think it's a bad position, and black will need to make a very large number of moves, sort of only moves in a row here, not to lose. So the computer suggestion here was to take en passant on c3, knight c3, and just play sorry, either c5, c4, or h5 immediately. Just playing once again for positional compensation, creating ideas of h5, h4 obviously. And c5, c4, another machine suggestion here, is aimed at giving yourself maybe additional squares to put the bishop on, and also in some cases maybe the e4 might run into something like knight e5, creating a very, very large threat of knight d3 check, so it also makes some positional sense. But after both c4 and h5, the machine suggests that with precise play, this is quite good for white. For instance, after h5, and once again, I'm showing you these moves just to kind of illustrate how outlandish the whole situation here is. The machine goes f4, h4, and rook f1, and says white is now better. And in many cases, it will attempt to castle queenside here, play something like queen d2 and then castle queenside. So it still remains a tremendous mess, but machine likes it for white now. Instead of all this, Ding played knight d2, and here arguably there was a very good option available to Magnus, which could turn again somewhat in his favor, but it's not really a move that I think Magnus makes very often, because he is such a sound positional player, and just playing h7, h5 here for no particular reason is not something that he considers very easily, I think. But it's a strong move here, because h4 is a very, very unpleasant threat. For instance, e4, h4 already kind of forces white to play hd3 and castle long, which is not something you want to do. You might be still sort of okay in this endgame, but you're not going to be enjoying it very much. So h5, let's say h4, and in this position there is a choice between queen takes b2, castles g5, which seems to lead to some kind of a draw after e2, e4. I'm not going to go into details here. It's all so bizarre and computerish that there really is no much point in showing you the details, but apparently this is equal. But the more interesting is to play bishop e5 and to pick up the b2 pawn with the bishop. And here I ran into a very interesting evaluation, which I want to show you because it's really non-obvious at all to me. If white castles here, first of all, there is g5 here, but once again, after g5, e4, the machine says white is not getting mated. I would need to check and recheck it many, many times to believe it, but that's the conclusion. But the machine just takes on b2 quietly, rook b1, bishop c3, and after e4, which is, I'm pretty sure this is what Magnus would have been worried about if he got to this position in his evaluations. The machine just very quietly goes queen d4, attacking the knight on d2, knight b3, takes on e4, gives up the pawn on c5, and then gives up one of his two proud bishops. And this position, the machine suggests, is quite seriously better for black. And this took me a while to get used to, this idea. But I think you can sort of begin to understand why, because the bishop on b7 is completely locked down, and this pair of the pawns on e5, e6 and d5, you could arguably describe it as a weakness in some other circumstances, but here, when the rook on b1 and the rook on f1 are so completely and utterly dominated by the bishop on c3, which takes away, well, all the squares basically, that this pawn pair is extremely safe. There's really no good way for white to put any pressure on those pawns. And black is just aiming to play something like knight d6, maybe g6, throw in g6 somewhere to secure the pawn on h5, go rook f8. The king could go towards c7, b6 later on to make it even safer. The knight goes to, as I mentioned, d6, sometimes later to e4, sometimes later to f5. And it's much harder just to create any kind of an arrow here which would illustrate what white is doing. White is kind of stuck here. No active plans, very restricted, very passive pieces. And yeah, this was a bit of a revelation to me, that you can go for positions like this and play them for a win, but this is what the machine suggests. But as I said, playing h7, h5 and after knight d2 is not an easy choice at all, and Magnus played castles, which is a very human move. Ding castled. If you play bishop e5 here, without all those inclusions, white can, for instance, go knight c4, knight c5, bishop e8, and in this position you can play e4, but you can also just give this knight up for a couple of pawns and free up your pieces. And this is some kind of a mess once again, but it seems like it's a mess white should probably welcome to a degree. He is at least not worse and maybe can play for a win even. Instead, Magnus took on b2, e4, and here he went for a position which surprised us a great deal when we were following the game live, but once again it just goes to show how well he understands chess and how well he understands the margins and the tricky evaluations in very non-standard spots, because what he did here arguably is the best choice. Play bishop b5 here and take on f1, but it's a very difficult choice for black to make, because white, and you will see this motif later in the game as well, white almost never really cares about this exchange as long as he gets to destroy the black center and revive the bishop on b7. And here, after king takes f1, suggests that after e4 and c4, black is sort of still okay. But considering where black is in this position, trying to hold some kind of a situation like that is just very unattractive. In d4, and after ed5, just play d6, e5. And this is a very conceptually interesting idea. Black is once again a full exchange down. He did pick up the pawn on b2, but he had to give up the central pawn on d5. But the bishop on b7 is once again kind of dead, because the pawn on d5 does a very good job of restricting the return to that bishop to the king's side. And black will have very serious initiative on the king's side with the ideas of knight g5, bishop h3, e5, e4, all these kinds of things. So black has probably just full compensation for the exchange here. e3 was played. During the live show we were making an argument for knight f3 instead, queen g4 and knight h4. And here is yet another illustration of just how difficult it is to understand these positions for a human being. Because the computer suggests that black can... We were trying to play for attack here, like queen h3 or queen something. The machine just takes on d1, rook a d1, 5, and says black is significantly better here. And there aren't even any immediate obvious threats, and black is still a full exchange down. And yet white will have to fight very diligently for equality here. And yeah, when I saw that on my screen, it was very interesting, because there is no way this is how I would evaluate this position if I got it in a game. I would know I'm in a fight, I would know that it's not at all clear that I'm better, but to immediately accept that I'm worse here with white would be extremely difficult. I don't think it's where you default to if you're the player leading the white pieces in this position. So knight b3 is a lot stronger, and Ding was once again queen e4. Magnus really not interested in trading queens here. Queen d3. Here he could play bishop f5, which probably wins the pawn on c2, because once again knight g5 is a huge threat, both here and in this position. But the position after knight d2, bishop c2, rook a c1, bishop d3, and rook fe1 is probably better for white, so it's not really that surprising that Magnus decided against it. He kept the queens on by playing queen f3, queen h5, and knight g5. And we're getting to the most critical positions of the game, and the game actually did not last very long from here. But doing justice to this position and the next position in the game is extremely, extremely difficult, and I will just show you some lines which the machine suggests are critical. For instance, in this position, it was much stronger to play queen e3 than what Ding played, creating an idea which I don't think it's very easy to intuitively understand that it's a strong idea, because let's discuss the position on the board for a second before we go into concrete variations. Once again, white is a full exchange up, but his pieces are somewhat discoordinated and the pawn on f3 is quite weak. And black has these ideas of bishop h3, for instance, or in some positions e5, e4, followed by bishop e5 might be a theme black wants to explore if there are good conditions for it. There's also some tactical ideas of c5, c4 in many positions. And mainly it's just not very easy to find a move to make for white. I was arguing for king h1, which might be a playable move in this position, but it's very technical. So, well, you need to be sure you don't lose to immediate e4 with the idea of bishop takes. You actually don't lose to e4, but playing king h1 is kind of scary and not an easy move to make. And making a move like queen e3, which is the machine's suggestion here, is also very difficult because you allow c5, c4, for instance, with the threat of c4 putting additional pressure on the c3 pawn here. But the machine thinks that sidestepping some of black's tactics is very important, first of all, and secondly, it thinks that creating the idea of h2, h4 is quite important. And for that, the queen is apparently much better placed on e3 than it is on d3. And for instance here, if black goes bishop b5, which is kind of naive chess, nobody really should play bishop b5 in this position. Now after h4, let's say bishop takes f1 and queen takes g5, white is very, very significantly better because the knight will land on e4 later in the game. And if you play bishop h3 instead, the machine goes rook f2, bishop f5. This is another reason why we sidestepped from d3, because now we have a good response to the threat of knight h3 check because the queen is not hanging. So we play king h1, bishop takes c2, and rook f1. And this is yet another position where the machine says white is better. I believe I let it run for a while here, and it seemed to like this position quite a bit for white. But exactly why it likes white so much here would be very difficult for me to explain compared to some of the other positions you see. So, of course, the game remains a huge, huge mess, and understanding who is better and why here is not at all easy. And then there is the move c5, c4, which, as I mentioned, is very, very critical. After which there's a number of positions which the machine assesses as equal. But once again, very difficult to understand from a human standpoint. One move here that you can make here is bishop c6. After which the threat apparently is to play bishop b5 after bishop c8, for instance, and after c3 we are now ready to play knight e4. But after bishop c6, black can play 3, rook f3, knight e4. And here another one of those really, really weird computer variations. The machine just takes on e4, takes on f2. Now you have to realize that if you take with the queen, you just lose to b3 on the spot. It's not, I think, an easy realization at all. The point being that white is currently so overloaded on the king side that he cannot really deal with this advance on the queen side. And if you take c2 just wins on the spot, you create the threat of queen d1. And if you take on c2, queen f3, followed by bishop c5 check and queen g2 mate, is just mate in 4 here. There's really no way to stop this threat at all. So after f2, rook takes f2, you have to take with the king. Black gives this check, king e2, and just plays h7, h5. And apparently this is some kind of a positional equilibrium. Good luck understanding why that is, but that's what I saw on my screen. I think the one proactive idea Black has after stabilizing with h5 and maybe even king h7 next move in some cases is to play queen f8 with the idea of bishop c5. But, well, I mean, the most I can say about this position is that it's extremely outlandish and I would say pretty much impossible to understand for any kind of a non-silicon based life form. But 0, 0, 0, so what do we know? And apart from bishop c6, there is also, after queen e3, c4, there is the immediate h4. And if Black goes for some kind of combinations connected with knight h3 check and check, apparently this sacrifice can just be turned down by 1. And after queen f5, simply rook f2. And the machine says the attack is parried once we establish our blockade with rook h2 and rook g1. And then the knight will land on e4 and white will be triumphant. But after h4, c3, queen takes g5, h takes g2, and once again I have to use my favorite word, apparently, which signifies I looked at this with the computer. I don't understand why it says what it says, but I know what it says. And here it says completely equal. For instance, rook a d1, bishop c5 check, king g2, bishop b5, and Black wins the material back and will be doing quite okay after that. This is my attempt to explain what happens after queen e3 here. I'm pretty sure it's a failed attempt, but it's the best understanding I can provide because I don't really, I can't claim to understand it myself perfectly. Instead, Ding played bishop c6, which is a very, very normal move, but objectively, this gave Magnus a very, very interesting shot of playing for a win here. He could have played e5, e4 here, which is a very thematic idea, obviously, but it's connected with very, very beautiful tactics, and it would have required a great deal of precision from Ding to deal with this. First of all, let's figure out why fe4 is not good. After fe4, Black goes knight h3 check, king g2, and here Black goes knight f2, which I think is what both of them missed. And this creates a threat of bishop h3 check, which is very strong. And if you take twice after queen h2, yeah, this position is very unpleasant for white. The king continues getting chased. And then after king c1, you can do, the queen has to go to e3, and then you play bishop e5. And the king on c1 is still completely boxed in, and you end up just having to give up the rook on a1 here. But finding all that over the board, I think, is extremely difficult. An even more weird situation appears if after e4 you play queen b5, although I think nobody ever plays queen b5 in their right mind. I don't think it's a move you can make. But here the machine suggests you play bishop h3, fe4, and you don't win the exchange back. You go rook takes f1, takes f1, and you play queen g4 here, creating the threat of bishop takes g3. This position might be possible to hold for white, but it's not pleasant. You have to start immediately returning material with e4, e5, and you end up having to hold some unpleasant endgames. But the move you probably do make if you realize what the point of fe4 knight h3 check is, e3. And here, once again, I left the machine running for a while, and it seems to suggest that after bishop e5, queen takes c5, white actually does make a draw somehow. After bishop h3, it just goes very quietly, rook a b1, and says this is not losing. You would need to really have balls of steel here to play like this with white, though, and this is why I think it's fair to say that e5, e4 was a very, very legitimate winning attempt. You probably don't win this position with Black against the machine, but you do stand a very, very good chance of beating a human player if you make this move, because making some of the decisions that are required from white to survive here would have been a very, very difficult task for even a player as strong as Liren is. But Magnus played bishop h3 instead, which is a very sort of normal human decision. And here queen e3, c4 transposes to something we have seen before. This is that weird position after rook f2, c3. And there is also an option of playing just bishop takes f1, rook takes f1, and c4, which probably also leads to equal-ish positions. And in view of all that, Ding Liren started with bishop b5, which is also a very thematic idea, trying to control the c5, c4 breaks. And if black pauses for just a little bit here, he will be quite significantly worse, because white, as usual, doesn't really care about returning this exchange. He cares about re-establishing control and then starting to dominate on the light squares. But Magnus realized all that, of course, and he played bishop takes f1, rook takes f5, rook takes f3, which is a very beautiful little combination which ensures the game gets drawn on the spot. Obviously, black's next move is e5, e4 against any light piece recapture, including rook f3, e4, of course, and here black is perfectly fine, and he's also perfectly fine after knight f3, e4. And Ding decided not even to check the idea of playing queen e2, knight f3, and king h1, where he objectively is simply not better at all. There is any number of moves which are decent for black. One thing you take on g3, because here white actually has very good winning chances, because in this position there is the move d5, d6 check, which wins the piece after both king takes d6. You can take bishop on g3 by taking even the pawn on g7 in the process. And obviously, if you take with the bishop gets picked up on the spot. But black can, for instance, improve all these with g5, now creating a threat of bishop takes g3, and for instance, after rook f1, g3, in the same position, not queen e7, of course, queen e6 check, and queen e7. Compared to the previous line, by playing g7, g5, black created those two very safe squares for the king to shuffle, and there is nothing better for white than giving this perpetual on the e7, e6 squares. But Ding, as mentioned, decided not even to check this over the board. He played queen e3 instead, knight takes f3, rook takes f3, queen takes f3, takes on king f2. And here draw was agreed, because this is, quite clearly a completely drawn opposite color bishop endgame. So this is the end of this very, very exciting game, which once again reaffirms the idea, which probably shouldn't surprise very many people, that these are the two guys who play chess exceedingly well, and even in the the somewhat Martian landscape that they found themselves in by move 15 today, they made very few mistakes, and I would say no glaring mistakes in this game. The computer would have played this game somewhat differently and more precisely, but the level of play is very, very high, and it's slightly regrettable that it all ended up in this very dry endgame and in a drawn move 32, but it's still one of the more interesting and original games of chess I have seen at the top level in a while. So I hope you enjoyed this recap video, and this would be a good time to mention that Jan Gustafsson and I will be doing live coverage of the Wijk tournament for the entire 13 rounds of it, both the Masters, and some attention will be paid to the Challengers as well, which is full of very, very interesting, promising young players, so there's a lot to watch there as well. And these shows will start promptly 10 minutes before the start of the round on Chess24, so consider watching us live as well, apart from these recap videos, which I'm not sure if they will be a daily occurrence, but if there is a game as interesting as this one, we will be trying to record recaps as well. So I hope to see you during our live shows, and thanks for watching. This has been Peter Svidler for Chess24.